Hey guys, today we're in the book of Exodus, chapter 34. Moses has been told that he is to lead Israel away from Sinai to go on and take them to the promised land. And we pick up today, and it said, "The Lord said to Moses to cut for yourself 2 tablets of the stone like the first, and I will write on the tablets the words that were on the first tablets which you broke." Remember, when Moses came down the mountain after 40 days being with God, he had the 2 tablets. He comes down and he sees Israel worshiping the golden cow that Aaron created, and he broke the commandments, not in anger, but symbolizing that Israel broke their side of the covenant. And so he broke the law of God. And so now God is telling him to remake it. The first time, God chiseled out the stones and God wrote it. This time, Moses chisels out the stones, but notice he says, I will write it. God still writes. It is only from God that we can have perfect law, perfect rule, and perfect legality, right? Anything perfection must come from God himself. And so it comes from God. And he says, which you broke. God is not blaming Moses for breaking it, okay? It was symbolizing, he's just saying, we're going to remake what you broke. And he's not saying, Moses, it was your fault, you got mad. It's not what he's saying at all. And then he says, be ready that morning and come up to Mount Sinai. So now Moses is going back up to Mount Sinai, back to God. And he says, make sure that no one will come up with you. Once again, like in Exodus 19, before the 10 Commandments, Moses is the mediator. It is God, it is Moses, it is Israel. Only Moses can come up the mountain. In verse 5, it says, the Lord descended in the cloud and stood with him there. We will know this to become the Shekinah glory cloud that fills the tabernacle, the Holy of Holies. God is coming in, shrouding himself in a cloud so that no one can see him. And it says, and the Lord passed before him, just as he said in the last chapter he would. The Lord passed before Moses and proclaimed, listen what God says about himself. He says, the Lord, a God is merciful. He is gracious. He is slow to anger, steadfast in love, faithful. He has steadfast love in thousands, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. This is what God declares about himself, that he is mercy, he is gracious, he is slow to anger, he is love, he is faithfulness, he forgives sin, right? This is a great proclamation of who God is. Remember the people of Israel. They have been in captivity for over 400 years. They only know the gods of Egypt, right? They know the gods of North Africa. These were the gods that were big and were full of power and full of wrath, and were always, if you don't do this, I will kill you, I will smite you. And this is the gods that they know. And now they have a God that they see in the thunder, in the lightning, in the fire, in the earthquakes. They see the majesty and the scope of who God is. But God describes himself as merciful, gracious, slow to anger, steadfast in love, and faithful, forgiving sin, transgression, and iniquity. So we can see kind of the dichotomy, right, of God. And so that's exactly what's happening. It's just an amazing proclamation of God. But he says he forgives iniquity, transgression, and sin. But notice what else he says. But who will by no means clear the guilty? God will forgive sin to those who want to be forgiven, right? If you reject this God will still hold you accountable for your sin. It is only those who come to God to ask for forgiveness that will be forgiven. God is a forgiving God, but he doesn't just wipe off everybody's. It's only those who seek to be forgiven. And after Moses saw this, notice he does two things. Verse 8, he bows down. The first thought after seeing and hearing this, he bows down and worships. Verse 9, the second thing he does is he prays for himself. He worshiped and he prays. And he said, that's what he said. And he said, now if you found favor in my sight, please let the Lord go in the midst before us, right? Please go with us into the promised land. And he said, behold, I am making a covenant. This is not a new covenant. He's already made the covenant in Exodus chapter 20, right? And so here he's saying, I'm renewing it, right? Israel already messed up by making the idol, worshiping, doing all the things they did a couple chapters ago. God is saying, I'm not forgetting it. Let's start over, right? Let's start over from the beginning, right? Before all the people, I will do marvels such as never been created. God is saying, I'm going to go before you. I'm going to do some amazing things, and that will confirm the covenant, right? These amazing things that you have never seen, and then a majority of the rest of the chapter are reminders of the law that has already been given. Okay. So he says, okay, I'll go with you. I will do some amazing things, but here's what you need to do, Israel. And I broke these down into sections just for time's sake. Verses 11 through 12, he tells them that Israel shall not get into any political treaties with any other nation. And then we have verses 13 through 15. It says that you should not join with any other religious parties or practices of any other nation. Verse 16, it says that you should not join in marriage with any other nation. Verse 17 just reminds them, hey, don't do idols, even though they just done it. He's reminding them, don't make idols. Verses 18 through 20 is for them to remember their redemption, remember Egypt, remember what God did to redeem them as slaves and to give them freedom. Verses 21 reminds them of the Sabbath. Remember to rest. Don't work too hard. Remember to rest. Verse 22 through 26, to remember God's provisions. Remember what God is doing and how they're supposed to do this. They're to do this in the festivals of the wheat and of the fruit and all of the tabernacles, right? To do this, right? To keep this up, to remember what God is doing. And then in verse 27, it says, the Lord said to Moses, write these words in accordance with these words I have made with covenant. So he was there with the Lord for 40 days and 40 nights. Again, Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights, and he neither ate bread nor drunk water. Does that sound familiar? Maybe something from the New Testament? We'll talk about it in a second. And so when Moses comes down, right, remember, he went up 40 days, and they thought he was dead, so they made a cow. And he came down and destroyed the cow, did all this. Now he's gone back up, and 40 days later, they didn't make another cow, right? They were like, oh, okay, we're going to be good, right? So he's coming down with the two tablets again, and notice what it says. Moses did not know the skin of his face shone because he had been talking with God. You read the story and you would expect Moses to be frail, right? And just kind of puny. He hasn't eaten or drank anything for 40 days. But when he comes down, his face is radiant. It's showing. And Aaron and all the people of the law of Israel, they said, Moses, your face is shining, and they were afraid to come near him. But Moses called them to him, and Aaron and all the leaders of the congregation returned to him. So they were scared. They ran away because of the glory of God was on Moses' face. But Moses calls them back, and they come. Verse 33, and Moses had finished speaking with them. He put a veil on his face. Now, what's interesting about this veil on his face is we don't really understand the full kind of realm of this until the New Testament. Paul writes about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 3, and he says that Moses put a veil on his face because after a while his face would dull. The glory of God would move away after time. He didn't want Israel to see his fading face and think God was a fading God. Okay. And so he put a veil on his face to protect Israel in their thought of how holy and how great their God was. Whenever Moses went before the Lord to speak with him, that would be at the tent of meeting, right? Remember that little tent outside all of Israel. He would remove the veil until he came out. And when he came out and told the people of Israel that he was commanded, the people of Israel would see the face of Moses, that the skin of Moses' face was shining. So he would go to the tent, he would talk, and when he came out, his face was radiant, was shining. But after a while of not talking with God, his face would dim, and then he would go back and it would be radiant again. And so that's why he put the veil on. What's interesting is that word shining. In the Hebrew, it's the word karen, karen. And it just simply means to radiate with a beam or a ray, to give off light. And so that's just, when you think of Moses' face shining, that's what it means. It was literally outputting light, not his light, but the glory of God. Hope that makes sense. We'll see you tomorrow in chapter 35. God bless.